I don't know about you, but one game I am looking forward to is Hell Let Loose Vietnam. I've been playing the Hell Let Loose World War II version since its early access. In fact, maybe even into the early alpha beta versions of it. Actually, before it ever came out, and I adore this title so much. But now we're going to get the same thing, with a little bit extra granted, in Vietnam. Vietnam has just not been explored as much as I think it deserves to be, especially in video games. So it is time to go over everything we know about Hell Let Loose Vietnam, because they've released a lot more information than you might have thought. In fact, they did a whole developer Q&A live stream. This thing is absolutely huge. It's almost an hour long, just with extra bits and information that we're going to get our hands on. Now, don't mind if some of the background gameplay is Hell Let Loose World War II. We only have the trailer for Vietnam, so I can't just put that on repeat for this entire video because, well, you might not make it to the end, or at least not in one piece. First things first, though, this is not just going to be a reskin. That's at least what they've been saying so far. Not a DLC, not a side project. It's a standalone entry built by a new team. Of course, both games will continue in parallel. World War II is not going to be killed. I am interested to see how having a second game is going to affect the player base, whether it is going to split it apart or bring in new fans, which would be obviously the ideal. But they're trying to expand this as a franchise, not just replacing what came before. Team 17, who now own Hell Let Loose, showed us what's new under the hood, the new gameplay mechanics, what the new maps are going to be, and how this is going to function. The team's pitch is pretty simple though. Vietnam is going to open up the gameplay space that just World War II doesn't seem to do. It's a historical setting with a lot of cultural resonance, plenty of documentary, military kit and tactics, and crucially for this game, a new combined arms layer. You see, in Hell Let Loose World War II, of course we have tanks and we have infantry, but that's about it. Of course, you can call in things if you are the commander, being able to do artillery strikes and bombing runs, but you're not actually able to get your hands on that sort of thing yourself. Yet within Hell Let Loose Vietnam, helicopters, RPB boats, asymmetric faction toolkits, and dense hostile environments with really cool mechanics that will broaden the core experience. They're trying to make a strategic franchise point here. Hell Let Loose isn't just about World War II. In fact, as soon as Team 17 bought that IP, that was their first decision. World War II will remain the cornerstone, and of course it's going to have its own 2026 and beyond roadmap, but the brand is trying to grow here. And this is where the business sort of meets the player fantasy, because as much as I love the idea of this franchise becoming a thing and expanding past World War II, of course it comes with potential drawbacks. The developers can say all they want that this is going to be a separate team working on it, but resources are still limited for the company. So, is it going to hurt the first game? I guess we'll only have to find out. The game, though, in terms of Vietnam, has been in development for a while. It's built on Unreal Engine 5. It is this standalone thing, and it's been in development for 16 months. They wanted the freedom to tear out the legacy constraints and fix foundational issues that are kind of hard to address in a live service title. And the way to do this? Make an entirely new game, but make it in a new setting, not to take people away from the initial title. This is a real big deal for infantry, armor players, and of course anyone that wants to try piloting as well. Kind of an immediate win. Moving it onto Unreal Engine 5 from the get-go means the infamous large world traversal stutter for Unreal Engine 4 should be gone from the first get-go. Anyone who's ever played Hell Let Loose, at least in its Unreal Engine 4 phases, and pretty much any other big game built on Unreal Engine 4 knows that there's always stutter in vehicles and little hitches during intense fights, and hopefully that's going to be gone. The team's stance is pretty pragmatic. They're not going to be throwing every shiny switch. They're selectively using a lot of features that improve performance and workflow rather than just, do everything all at once. Well, we can see some of the pitfalls that Unreal Engine 5 brings in. So how are they going to keep Hell Let Loose as it should be? Well, on one side, the US Army and the United States Marine Corps, and of course on the other side, you have the North Vietnamese Army. They're going to try and keep this with the DNA of Hell Let Loose. 50 versus 50 battles on large, readable maps, combined arms sandboxes that forces squads to specialize and, more importantly, work together and cooperate. A coherent chain of commands, like Hell Let Loose, we have it as now, with commander abilities and squad leadership. The design intent is a game of warfare. Vietnam, the rules feel identical or as close as practical to World War II, which means jumping between the two actually isn't going to be too tricky, not just for us as players, but for the developers themselves. I think it's going to be a pretty easy crossover. The team is focusing on recognizing all the armed forces, getting uniforms, equipment, and vehicles right, stitch level accuracy. Helicopter pilots and PBR crews are distinct roles with authentic gear, and on the NVA side, expect Soviet, Chinese supplied weapons, vehicles, tanks, and of course, these are all currently not just a work in progress, but have been moved into the internal playtests. We know that Hell Let Loose is kind of all about authenticity. That's what fans really keep close to their hearts when they think about this type of realistic World War II shooter, and they're trying to move that over to the next game. But the big differentiator here between the two games is asymmetry. The US can sling squads around the map via helicopters, fast insertions, rapid extractions, and dynamic repositions. The North Vietnamese army, they won't have helicopters, but a counter suite of heavy emphasis on anti-aircraft weapons and RPGs to make hot landing zones punishing, plus a tunnel network that changes how the ground war flows. We're not just going to be fighting on a flat plain here, no. We're going to be fighting across rivers, in the skies, on land, and underground. And the tunnels will function kind of like semi-fast travel for the defending and maneuvering North Vietnamese army, enabling quick fallbacks, flanks, and surprise redeployments that don't require suicide roleplay for long runs from the back line. They're placeable, hideable, and force Americans to actively hunt and clear and shut them down. I'm interested to see what they mean by sort of fast redeployments and kind of like fast travel. Now, my guess would be it just means you negate all the terrain so you can really quickly move around the map, but whether there's something more to that mechanic, I guess we'll have to find out. But of course, it's going to be mostly, or kind of entirely, based in the jungles. But it's not just the only visual note that there's going to be. Vietnam will ship with 6 maps at launch, spanning multiple campaigns and geographies, coastal zones with shoreline approaches, pockets of urban build-up, sandy and arid stretches, open grassland and wide agricultural spaces. The team emphasised that the environment itself is pretty dangerous and sightlines are secluded. Concealment is everywhere. Reading the terrain becomes a proper survival skill. Because of this dense foliage, it can make target acquisition kind of frustrating, actually finding where the enemies are in order to kill them. And this is always an issue with first-person shooters, where you feel like you're being shot at, but you can't see exactly where people are. So how are they going to fix that? Well, they're building a bit more into the visual and audio tells that help players infer where enemies are moving. The map's authentically driven rather than strict one-to-one recreations. You can't actually have it exactly the layout. It will be way too big, and they need to focus on flow and the way that the game moves, so players can move from one place to another, set up positions, and of course have good lines of sight on enemies to make it readable and also playable in a fun way. In terms of the practicalities of the actual gameplay itself, the UI and things like that not being ported over, being completely remade, menus, scoreboards, post-match highlights, the whole interface is getting a fresh pass. In fact, the reason really that they're doing Vietnam is not just to expand the setting of World War II into a new time era, but actually because Team 17 themselves, now they own this IP, they wanted to make a new game. They wanted to put their fingerprint on it without having to just mold what the previous developers had done, because they don't have the entire freedom and they can't actually make the game that they want to. And Hell Let Loose Vietnam is kind of letting them do that. They're going to entirely make a fresh game from the ground up and just pop it in that franchise, hopefully giving enough links between the two that it will feel like a new game in the franchise and not an entirely separate experience. But there's going to be dramatically improved clan support. You'll be able to create and manage clans in-game, party up with clanmates, and get pulled into the same server together. No more countdown and just hope that you manage to get into a server or join a very long queue. Clans have goals and progressions, plus competitive challenges against other clans. That's baked into the client itself, and this goes hand in hand with a reworked online backend intended to deliver pretty good feature parity across platforms. Of course, proper cross-store parties on PC before you even load into a server. Yes, you will actually finally have a party system within a Hell Let Loose game. That's kind of something that I don't know why isn't in Hell Let Loose at this point in time, but hopefully once they've done it for Vietnam, they can put it in the base game. That would be pretty goddamn nice. But let's talk a little bit about helicopters, because I think it hasn't really been touched on too much, and they do give us a little bit more information. Someone will have to pilot these things, and you'll be able to get in these things as passengers. You can insert a squad on a ridge, or even pull them out after a failed push, leapfrogging from the front line to a threatened flank. I mean, maybe this means the maps are going to be slightly bigger, since I think a helicopter on the Hell Let Loose game would be insane, because you'd get across it in 2 seconds. So hopefully we'll see bigger maps with this. But ravine combat adds a distinct lane to the battlefield, with PBRs patrolling waterways and suppressing banks, offering mobile fire support where roads just don't exist. Then, of course, where there is roads, you'll get armor benefiting from these more sane terrain systems. Now, the game How Let Loose Vietnam is currently slated for Steam, Epic, Xbox, and PlayStation, and they've reiterated next year, hopefully, for release. So that's pretty encouraging. We don't have to wait too goddamn long. So what does this really actually mean for the people that are playing How Let Loose at the moment? If you're anchored in World War II, the message is kind of continuity. Vietnam is not going to siphon off the World War II roadmap. It runs alongside it with a separate team. The upside is shared learning, techniques, tools, and a pipeline that developers for Vietnam can then inform World War II stuff, like adding in party play. That's the kind of thing that can go back and forth. From a franchise perspective, the reason that they chose to do this is because they wanted to make a point that How Let Loose, at least in the future, is not just about World War II. And that I think they're probably not going to just stop at Vietnam either. The reason they went into more modern is because they want to go more and more. And I think they're going to try and turn How Let Loose into one of the biggest first-person shooter franchises we have. And that's probably the most controversial point. I think a lot of people that have played this game since its early access versions are kind of stuck in the past, and they're stuck of the way that they love the game, and too much change is kind of terrifying. But having a much bigger company at the reins of it with more resources and more ideas means that they're inevitably going to push it into somewhere where it becomes as profitable as a huge mainstream shooter, maybe even something like a Battlefield type thing with more realistic standards. Is that possible? Well, probably, but they're kind of testing the waters on Vietnam. And if this is a success, I think this is going to be something we see more and more as more How Let Loose games are released into the future. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Yet stay subscribed if you want more upcoming information on How Let Loose Vietnam as soon as it comes out. But until then, I will see you in the next one.